You are live.
Thank you. Welcome back to the Vermont House Appropriations Committee. It is Tuesday, February 14th, 2023, 1:30. We are going to hear next is our witness from the Vermont Humanities, and it's going to run through their activities and their budget. You have not met us. We'll introduce ourselves, if that's all right, and then you can introduce yourself for the record, and then you can start. I'm Representative Diane Lanford from Virgins, represent Addison 3.
Robin Shaw from Middlebury.
Pat Brennan from Colchester.
Dick Bloomley from Burlington.
Tristan Tolino, Brattleboro.
Terry Dolan from Waitsfield, and I represent Duxbury, Easton, Moretown, Waitsfield, and Water.
Lynn Dickinson, I represent St. Albans Town.
I'm Mark Mahaly. I represent Calais, Marshfield, and Plainfield.
Trevor Squirrel, under Elton Chapel.
Woody Page, Newport.
Becca Holcomb.
Too many names.
Good afternoon, Jim Harrison from the town of Chittenden in Mendon, Kennington, and Pittsfield.
Thank you. I know some of you, but it's great to hear everybody's name, and you don't have that handy little chart that used to be in the committee room.
It's going to be right there.
Said everybody's names. Right there. Well, my name is Christopher Kaufman-Ilstrup. I live here in Montpelier, and I'm the executive director of Vermont Humanities. Thank you ever so much to Rebecca and to Tristan, who have been our budget liaisons. Tristan in the last biennium and Rebecca now. And thanks to the new members as well for giving us a little extra time this year to talk a bit more about who we are and what we do in case you might not know. So I'm going to start actually following up on a couple of things from Amy's presentation this morning and just say, Madam Chair, that you absolutely are an artist in your budget work. Budgets are a creative expression of values, right? That's how we build them. In my shop, that's a big principle for how we decide how we're going to spend our resources. Every dollar is important. We look at it through the lens of our mission. We decide how it's going to meet that mission, how it's going to support the values that we uphold as an organization over time. And if budgeting is done well, that's what it is, right? It's storytelling and it's expressions of values. So thank you for acknowledging that. And I also want to say that 12th night is the 12th day of Christmas. Many of you might know it from the Christmas Carol, right, with the 5 golden rings and the 2 turtle doves. Yeah. That's how most people today know 12th night. It's also a play by Shakespeare, which is very important for today, right? Music, if music be the food of love, play on, is from 12th night. If you grew up Catholic like I did, you may also know that 12th night is Epiphany. Yeah. So I just wanted to loop that back in. Ask the humanities guy if you need to know these things. So if music be the food of love, play on. Is a good motto for today. So I just want to note first for the chair and the co-chair that I grew up in Virgins.
That's, I read aloud. Yeah.
And let me see if I can make my slides go forward.
Oh my God, what year did you graduate?
1987.
I was
Same class?
No, I was the teacher.
Do we have to hear this?
All right, never mind. I'm sorry. Yeah, so I was at the elementary school, so I didn't come over to the high school until 91.
Yeah, that would have been a little bit after my time. I was in college then, but I like to say that I grew up in Virgins, not because I'm proud of being a person who has lived in Vermont my whole life. I think you can move to Vermont yesterday and still be a Vermonter. But it's an important part of my humanities story because the Bixby Library is such an amazing local resource. And of course, there are humanities sites all over Addison County and across the lake in New York. And that was a big part of my experience growing up as a young person, becoming interested in history and literature is through those institutions that are in every small town around the state. So I just really wanted to acknowledge that connection. And then I'm not going to do an entire repeat of what Amy said this morning, but I do want to say that we have the same 3 requests that Amy had. this morning, and she has since nuanced that number one just a little bit, right? We were initially going to ask you all to cover the whole $150,000 to support the Create Vermont Action Plan. Since then, Amy has gotten word from the NEA that there'll be about an additional $74,000. So as she said this morning, if you all just match that, we'll have covered that $150,000 ask. So I wanted to make sure you knew that. Amy is upstairs right now as we speak in the institutions committee, talking to them about the capital bill and increasing that amount from $50,000 to $75,000 annually for art and state buildings. And then the third ask is more directly related to my budget, and it's to raise our appropriation from the governor's recommendation, which is 246 and change, up to 300,000, which would largely support increasing grant making and programmatic work out in local communities in your district, providing significant additional grant support, which hopefully will be a bit of a softer landing as the ARPA funds wind down. We are increasing our regular programmatic grant making and looking to raise additional dollars for that. So we hope you'll consider that.
So increasing your base appropriation to $300,000, not by.
Not by $300,000.
One word makes such a big difference, and from.
For what is it now? What's the base of?
246.
246.
From
$50,000 increase.
That's about 54,000.
Yeah. I mean, if you made a mistake and wanted to increase us by 3, that'd be great. We'd manage. That would be fine. So those are the three asks that we're putting forth this year, the ups, as it were. And I'm going to spend much of the rest of my time actually doing some storytelling rather than running you through numbers. There are a lot of numbers in the report that we made to the governor's office, and you're welcome to look at that and ask me questions, and I'm more than happy to answer them. But we thought we'd spend a little time talking about impact, right? Did it make any difference?
This Representative Holcomb's budget area, and so we'll filter questions out after through her. But Representative Mahaly?
Hi, I'm just out of curiosity, I'm seeing that the governor's budget was $11,741 more than last year's budget. What was that?
Sure. The governor actually did increase their recommended funding by 5%.
That's 5%. Okay, all right. Got it. Okay.
So we're
That
grateful.
was just for salaries and
Yeah.
benefits and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're grateful to them for increasing by 5%. We hope you'll bump it up a bit more. We've been roughly in that 220, 225 for a long time. So the governor has bumped it up every year for the last 3 years. That's gotten us to the 246.
Do you know how many years you've been at about 225?
I started in this job in 2018, and at that time it had been at 217 for about 8 years. And it stayed at 217 for a couple of years after that, and then the governor started increasing us by 2% and 3%.
So in real dollars.
Real dollars, it's shrunk quite a bit.
Those are nominal dollars, right? Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Representative Harrison?
Can you give us a picture of where the rest of your funding comes from?
Sure, absolutely. So like the Arts Council, we are the state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, as they are with the NEA. So about 50% of our funding comes from NEH every year through congressional appropriation. It's been a good year for that with Senator Leahy's last budget, so we're thankful. We do expect somewhat of an increase this year, which will again go into grant making. We raise about 35 to 40% from private foundations and individual donors. So unlike the Arts Council, you all are not required to match our federal appropriation dollar for dollar. We are required to match it, but with any dollar. So the state appropriation counts towards the match, but it is not the whole match. The rest of it comes from the community.
And if you had to compare how we as a state do in terms of supporting the humanities, how would we compare? I mean, obviously we're a small state, so we can't do what larger states do like New York. But do we do better or worse from on a per capita basis, if that's even fair to look at it that way?
That's a little tricky, I will say, to look at it that way. I will say that just, in terms of states, only a little under half of the states get a state appropriation each year. So in that sense, you're way ahead of
Right, we're at
30 or more.
Right, okay.
Right? There have been some states that have done much better than Vermont. Oregon is an example, Connecticut is an example, where they have put in place programs like a 1% for the Arts program that supports the arts and humanities grant making across the state. So Oregon has a huge supportive budget because it's 1% of the budget.
Right.
And other states. Generally speaking, I feel like Vermont does very well. We're very grateful for our relationship with the legislature and with the governor. And this feels like a good landing spot for us right now.
Thank you.
And keep staying on the revenues for a second. What are you seeing in terms of your ability to raise private contributions?
Sure. It's been interesting. We have actually increased our annual budget quite a lot over the last 5 years. We had been sort of stuck at about 1.2 million for quite a long time. This year, our budget is going to be much closer to 2 million. Almost all of that growth comes from individual donors and foundations. That said, we know that as with many arts and culture organizations, it's a challenge. And what we see is fewer donors giving more money. And that seems to be a trend across the cultural sector and really across the nonprofit sector. So people who are doing well are giving more. People who are maybe the $25 or $50 donors are maybe questioning where they're putting their philanthropic dollars.
So it makes it more unstable, it sounds like.
It's harder to predict, right? And with this year being the first year that we're really coming out of ARPA and CARES Act dollars, it's going to be particularly interesting. I don't think it's going to have as much of an effect on us, but on a lot of our smaller grantees, I think it could be quite a dangerous year, which is one reason why we'd like to have more money for grant making to support those organizations as they come out of this time.
Good. Representative Dickinson?
Yeah, thank you. I'm reading your letter and you talk about the $9 million cultural recovery grants. I take it that's the ARPA money.
That is the
Can you
ARPA
talk
money.
a little bit about where that went, what the impact was?
Sure.
Where the people receive the grants?
That's the Creative Futures program that Amy talked about this morning. So the money was appropriated to the Arts Council, but with the express understanding that it included the humanities organizations. So it included all of the museums and historical societies and so on that have been supported by CARES Act funding and federal ARPA funding. They've had one completed grant round. The deadline for the second one is coming up in the next week or so. And then there'll be a third one later in the spring. So all the money will be out the door
By August.
by August. As Amy said this morning. I think about close to 4 million, 3.6, I think, went out in the first round. And it was to organizations large and small across the state, right? So very big organizations like the Flynn would get a $200,000 grant. Very small single proprietor craftspeople would get a $3,000 grant. I can't quite speak to all of those stories, but Amy certainly could because she's managing the program and we're helping them market it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Representative Page?
Your private contributions, how many of those, what's the percentage of Vermont private contributions?
Virtually 100% of the contributions. There are a few that come from out of state, but they're generally Vermonters that live out of state. Okay.
Good.
Shall I motor on?
Please.
So I just want to note that we created a new strategic plan in 2022. We have a new mission. It's much more action oriented than we've perhaps been in the past. We connect with people across Vermont to create just, vibrant, and resilient communities and to inspire a lifelong love of learning. That's very important to us that we think about ourselves as arts organizations and cultural organizations are as community development drivers, right? We're not just entertainment, we are making a difference in communities through promoting civic engagement and community change. So I think that's really important for folks to know. We've been working really hard on this over the last few years to really rethink how and why we do our work. We've often used a bit of a joke about the past versus the now. We've said, we used to be the sage on the stage model, right? Where we would invite the white bearded academics from Yale and from Harvard to come in and give us their wisdom, and we would receive the wisdom. That's not what we do anymore. It's not that we're ignoring Yale and Harvard. They're important. We will bring them in every once in a while. But the goal is to really engage everybody in storytelling, everybody in the humanities, and acknowledge that everybody has a story to tell and that story should be valued. So we're really moving away from that. People often think of the humanities in a very academic way, right? We're not a set of books on the shelf, right? It's not like here's the ethics section, here's the philosophy, here's the history section. It's about how we interact and engage with one another in communities. I do want to note that the NEH has been really moving on this journey with us over the last couple of years. The NEH, again, the National Endowment for the Humanities, is our federal partner and our largest funder. And they have asked humanities councils across the nation to engage in these 5 pillars: advancing racial equity, confronting the climate crisis, restoring the United States of America's global standing, responding to the pandemic, and strengthening our democracy. And I would say that that first one and that last one is where Vermont has really dug in over the last couple of years. And I'll tell you a couple of stories about that. And of course, our response to the COVID pandemic. We have partnered with the Arts Council every single day since March 12th, 2020, to make sure that the sector gets what it needs around COVID relief. And that's really, really, really important to us. I do want to tell you one story of one of our grantees, and I swear I did not pull this because the chair and the vice chair are from Addison County, but this is an Addison County. This is an Addison County example. A grantee highlight: the Henry Sheldon Museum in Middlebury is one of our key important local partners. They are the Historical Society for Addison County. Henry Sheldon was a collector of Addison County ephemera in the 19th century. It's an enormous collection. And they have really taken it upon themselves as a small museum to contribute to the field's understanding of where we are today around diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. We helped to sponsor this program called The Elephant in the Room for them, which was really taking a look at how humanities organizations today should be interpreting our collections, should be presenting them to the public, should be thinking about them, as opposed to the way that we may have done it in the past. They ran a series of 6 seminars that were watched by people all over the country. Right? They were online and they were available to anyone who wanted to watch them. In fact, you all could go watch them now. They're still there if you want to. And the goal was to really question the kind of history that cultural heritage organizations perpetuate and provide a framework for how institutions of all sizes can engage in essential conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's really key for them. They've been doing a lot of work, for example, on an archive that they rediscovered on 2 women who lived together as a married couple in the early part of the 19th century, demonstrating that same-sex relationships existed and were supported in Addison County as early as 1800. So it's not a new thing. There's a great book out about that story called Charity and Sylvia. You should check it out at some point. You can get it up. As a small local organization, they didn't have to do this, but they really wanted to step into this space, and we're very glad to support them. I now want to go to a program highlight. Some of you probably are familiar with Vermont Reads. This is a program we've been running for 20 years where we pick one book and we encourage community conversations around it all over the state. This was our book for 2021-22. We Contain Multitudes by Sarah Henstra. It is a book about LGBTQ young people. She came to Vermont for a week-long residency, traveled across the state, met with students, both college students and high school students around Vermont, to talk to them about her experience of writing the book, what it's like to be a professional writer, and the themes in the book, really. And I wanted to read to you a quote from a librarian that we received a couple of months ago. So this is from a very remote Northeast Kingdom library where maybe it's not very diverse. And the librarian wrote to us and said, "We are in the most rural and remote part of Vermont. It is sparsely populated and there's not a lot of diversity in population. Reading We Contain Multitudes together showed our community, especially those who may or may not be openly LGBTQ, that the library is an inclusive and welcoming place for everyone. Our K-12 school library had a book challenge last spring from a vocal group of parents who objected to LGBTQ books. The school administration, supervisory union, and school boards upheld the books unanimously through a series of appeals, and the books remain in the school library today." She continued to say, "I'm certain that because we read We Contain Multitudes, people know that the library is an ally. And she truly believes that having these conversations is the beginning of thinking about others who may not have had our lived experience in our rural community." She concludes by saying, "I was so grateful for the opportunity to work with this wonderful, well-written, special book." And we get stories like that all the time through Vermont Reads. We're going to talk about the current Vermont Reads book, which I brought for you as well. But I felt like it was worth highlighting We Contain Multitudes. It was actually the first time a Vermont Reads book addressed LGBTQ issues in the 20 years of the program.
I just want to say, I raised a kid here, and that program was just amazing for her to participate in.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's just growing and growing. It's really, really been great to see. I'm not going to go too deep into the Create Vermont Action Plan because Amy talked about it this morning, but I just want to highlight again for you just a couple of things, right? 9.3% of Vermont's total jobs are in the creative and cultural sectors. That's 41,000 Vermonters. That's a huge amount of people that are working in this field. And nearly half of them are freelancers or entrepreneurs, right? Running their own small businesses, which is really enormous. So the work that you did with the $9 million for the Creative Futures Act is affecting all of those people and their families and the communities that they live in. So I just think it's important to reemphasize that. We do a lot of grant making and a lot of community projects. And I want to just tell you very briefly about a couple of things that we've done. I want to hold up the comic book, which I think David Sheets may have already given to you.
Oh, yeah.
So this was a project.
I've seen it, but I haven't have it.
This is a project commissioned by Vermont Humanities in partnership with the Secretary of State's office through the Center for Cartoon Studies. And if you haven't already, you will shortly get a.
That's because we never leave the room.
From.
Every now and then we get to go out for air.
Yeah, you do get to go out for air, right? This is not just about the State House. It's about democracy writ large. And if you haven't had a chance to read it yet, I highly recommend it. I believe that Sarah is going to send you all a survey asking you how many copies you would like for town meeting day. So you can take stacks back to your. Sarah Copeland-Hanses, sorry. The
Secretary of State, okay.
So this is among the kinds of things that we produce.
We could talk about meeting week.
Yeah.
I will also say, we supported the Vermont Council on Rural Development's Community Leadership Summit this year, which is really to us about civic engagement. This other picture is one of our humanities camps that happen all summer long, all over the state. This happens to be a camp on Indigenous themes, and so the kids were learning about herbal medicine through an Indigenous lens on that day. So we, I think we made 117 grants last year across the state, in addition to our own programming that we run. We also support, the Snelling Center's Vermont Leadership Institute and Vermont School Leadership Institute, and other kinds of civics programs around the state. Just want to make sure I'm catching where I need to be. So back to Vermont Reads, we're going to talk just a little bit about Most Costly Journey, then I'm going to wrap up and we can talk about the budget and we can questions that you might have. So as you know, it's a statewide one book program. Everybody's welcome. The books that we pick are meant to be accessible from roughly 6th or 7th grade up, but of interest to any reader. This is the 20th anniversary of the Most Costly Journey, El Viaje Más Caro. Over the course of the program, over 200 communities have participated. You may remember the 251 Club was in the card room last week.
Yes.
So over 80% of Vermont communities have participated in Vermont Reads over the course of the program. This particular year, this particular book, as of now, we're about 7 months in of a year-long project. 85 communities have signed up to do projects. It's not a book club. It's not something where you just read the book and then go home. The idea behind it is that every community that participates has to do a community project. And they do all kinds of different things. I will say that the program really took off back in 2018-19 when we did March Book One, the only other comic book that was a Vermont Reads book by John Lewis, Andrew Iden, and Nate Powell. They came to Vermont in October of 2019. It was actually the second to last public talk that John Lewis gave before he passed away. So we feel really honored that he was here. Andrew was back last week. He was in the chamber for Farmers Night. Some of you may have met him. He spoke to about 1,000 high school students at the Paramount and online the next day. Continues to be really popular. Kids really remember his visit, and he communicates with them through Twitter and other means. So that's when it really started to take off. And now here we are with the Most Costly Journey. So that we don't do anything without collaboration. That's a really key thing to know about us. We partner with the Vermont Arts Council every day, literally every day. I'm in contact with them. This Vermont Reads project partners very closely and explicitly with the Open Door Clinic. That's a federally qualified health center in Middlebury. Vermont Folklife, UVM Extension, Migrant Education, the Center for Cartoon Studies, Merrick Bennett's Comic Workshop, and the UVM Lane series. Everything we do happens in partnership. The Open Door Clinic is the creator of the Most Costly Journey, El Viaje Más Caro, and we're going to watch a short video now that will tell you a little bit more about that. If I can make it play.
So we're a free health clinic for people who do not have health insurance and people who are underinsured. It just so happens that about 50% are agricultural immigrant workers, but the other 50% are Vermonters.
Over 1,000 migrant laborers from Mexico and other countries milk cows, fix tractors, shovel manure, process chickens, and take care of calves in our state. Many of these workers stay close to the farms where they work out of fear of being deported, lack of transportation, or other reasons. The problems caused by this isolation led Open Door Clinic nurse Julia Doucet to imagine a series of Spanish-language pamphlets. These would help farm workers share their stories with each other.
So really what it was a way for someone to share a story that we could share with other workers and say, look, you're not the only one who is sitting at home drinking alone because you have no social outlet and you miss your family. You're not the only one who struggles to speak to your boss because he speaks English, you speak Spanish.
Julia chose cartooning as the medium for the pamphlets, as comics are common in Latin America and can be enjoyed by people of all ages and literacy levels. With help from the Vermont Folklife Center, UVM, and Middlebury College, the Open Door Clinic recorded stories of some of Vermont's migrant farm workers. El Inmigrante, the immigrant, is a farm worker and an artist. His pamphlet was titled Something Inside.
Ahora sí, la historia, la travesía, cómo fue cuando yo pues crucé la frontera, ¿no? Para acá, para este país. Y pues sí es algo, se viven cosas muy tristes al cruzar, pues de ver compañeros que vienen y no poderlos ayudar, que se tienen que quedar. Entonces es algo muy triste, ¿no?
The Vermont Folklife Center helped develop the project's collaborative methods. They also connected cartoonists to illustrate the workers' stories. Merrick Bennett is a cartoonist from Henniker, New Hampshire. He illustrated the story of El Inmigrante, the immigrant.
Por mi parte, yo recibí esa entrevista escrito y yo tenía la idea, bueno, eso puede ser como 20 libros de historias, tantas historias en este.
The original plan was just to print them in Spanish because they were for Spanish speakers.
But grants from the UVM Humanities Center and the Vermont Community Foundation funded a series of English translations of the pamphlets. And a Kickstarter campaign helped raise the capital needed to print the English language The Most Costly Journey, which includes a foreword by Vermont novelist Julia Alvarez. The English translation has given another purpose to the stories.
It allows people who wouldn't otherwise have an understanding of the community of people who live among us to have insight and build compassion and understanding.
Pero creo yo que con lo que está es suficiente para poder comunicar a los lectores, a todo, para que conozcan, pues, la vida de los emigrantes, todo lo que se sufre, lo que pasa uno para poder lograr.
Y el migrante, usted me dijo que también lo más importante es la familia y por eso es la razón de todo.
Ahora sí que no viene uno a este país nomás ahora sí por gusto, sino es un sacrificio que hace uno, pues para darle algo mejor a la familia, ¿no? Entonces, pues creo yo que pues el libro lo expresa, lo dice.
Cada persona tiene su historia y espero que el lector puede aprender un poquito de estas historias. Somos vecinos, tenemos que escuchar cada quien. Es necesario escuchar un poquito y leer de estas historias que son muy importantes en nuestras comunidades. Legalidad son importantes. Y gracias por compartir tu historia conmigo y con el proyecto también.
Fue algo para mí, pues algo bonito, ¿no? De que pues, siendo un emigrante que llegué aquí sin conocer nada, sin tener un familiar, un amigo, pude sacar esto, ¿sí? Y tener estas conexiones. Para mí pues, es algo que he logrado.
So, thanks for watching. It's important to bring the voices of actual people into this room, right? I'm just a white guy who raises the money. But that's the kind of work that we do and the kind of difference that it makes. So right now there are currently 5,000 copies of the book in distribution all over Vermont. Of course, we see special interest from farming communities in the Northeast Kingdom, in Orleans, Franklin, Addison County especially. But really, all 14 counties are doing work with the book right now. As I said earlier, 85 different community groups have applied to host Vermont Reads. This is easily, by the time we're done at the end of June with this year, going to be the most popular Vermont Reads book ever. And I'm preparing everybody now. It may be a while before we find another unicorn like this that gets us further. But there are a couple of things that I felt like, a couple of the projects that I felt like you should really know about. The UVM School of Nursing is now using the book with all of its first-year students who are, going to be the next generation of Julia Doucette's, who are going out and doing this work. The Vermont Department of Libraries runs a program for any state employee to read the book and discuss it. They did that back in the fall. The Vermont's AmeriCorps Vista program, which places young people in anti-poverty organizations around the state, used it in their orientation program. And those AmeriCorps Vistas are being encouraged to run community programs at their sites. And then finally, I think it's important to know that Governor Scott's Office of Racial Equity, led by Susanna Davis, used the book as part of their IDEAL program, which is the program they're running for municipal managers to consider how to integrate diversity, equity, and inclusion work in town government. And so they used the book for everybody that they were working with. I think they had about 60 people in their first cohort. They were town clerks, town managers, select board members, development planning commission members, and so on. So I just wanted to kind of highlight those more systemic uses of the book, as well as noting it's being used in schools everywhere. So I'm going to pause here and let you guys ask questions if you have any, and we can talk about the budget a little bit.
I think you're going to want to go to budget. Is that right?
Probably, yeah. Why don't we hear the budget first, and then it'll spark the questions.
Sure. I'm going to stop sharing so that I can look at what you're looking at. Yes.
What you want us to, okay.
Yeah. Is that the one that
Page 5?
that says negative 100,000 at the bottom?
Yeah.
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 Should we start there and I can explain what that is?
Yes.
Okay.
Walk us through what this is.
Sure. When we had to dump all live programming in 2020, we saved a lot of money because we didn't have to buy plane tickets or hotel rooms or pay mileage or anything like that. So we have some cash reserves. We strongly feel that that money is not ours to sit on. That money is to be used for the community. And so we've created, with the approval of our board, a plan to spend down the cash reserves to what we would consider a reasonable and healthy level by using surplus dollars for additional grant making over the next 2 to 3 years. We didn't want to push it all out the door in 1 year and then have nothing in future years. But our expectation is that we'll be using $100,000 this year, 2023.
Okay.
And then probably 75,000 and then 50,000. And hopefully by that time, we will have been able to increase our fundraising enough that we can keep our grant making at that level or higher in the future. So that's what that means.
So the 100,000 on the bottom here, you're going to use carry forward.
That's carry forward.
Okay.
But it's not state funding, right? That's privately raised dollars.
Right.
Right, state funding is spent.
Okay.
So if you go to the top, you'll see kind of going down that our annual fund, which is individual donors, is set at $255, I think, for this year. I'm not quite looking at the same exact thing that you're looking at. And then restricted contributions, which is foundations and grants, at $335 for a total of $590. That's our privately raised dollars. The next section down is government grants. We are expecting, when we made this budget, the budget had not passed, the omnibus had not passed, so we level funded it at around $750. We expect a couple of special initiatives. We've actually just gotten word from NEH that they are running an initiative this year called United We Stand, which will send some additional money to the councils for work countering hate speech and radicalization specifically. And then the state appropriation, which when we passed the budget.
Let me just ask, the 750 then you think might be coming in higher, but that's the level funded amount.
Right, that's the level funded amount. And we won't know for a little while yet exactly what that's going to look like. Similar to what Amy said this morning, right? We have to wait for them to process the appropriation and we'll find out down the road. State appropriation was set at level funded plus 3%. And we're hoping that you'll increase it to.
Representative Harrison has a question.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, more of a question on timing. It looks like a calendar here that you operate under.
That is true. Thank you. And Rebecca asked me to point that out. Sorry, I didn't. We do operate on a calendar year, not the state year.
So the federal government operates on a fiscal year, I think October.
Yes.
Not that they ever have their act together by October, but so I guess two things. One, you're showing 750, but you think it might be a little higher. That's for the fiscal year that the federal government is in right now.
Correct.
So later this year, theoretically, you'll get a new number again, which will still be, do you get that in like one lump sum?
Oh my goodness, it's so complicated. Right, so the feds passed a continuing resolution to get them to passage of the budget. So we got a notice of award just for the dates of the continuing resolution that was level funded from the year before. Now that the budget has been passed by the federal government, we are waiting for NEH to determine what the funding allocations are for the states and jurisdictional councils. We should find that out soonish, but they're not very transparent about it. I'll just leave it at that.
But do you get, let's just say it's 750, do you get that all at once?
We apply for it quarterly.
Okay.
Different councils do it differently. We have the blessing of having a very strong private fundraising program, so we get it on a reimbursement basis. There are some councils that don't have the fundraising that we have. They have to get it on an advance basis. It's different for everyone. But we've made it very consistent now.
You know, that's helpful. So even if Congress does pass a budget for October, you might get the first quarter of next year's appropriation this calendar year, might.
That is correct.
Okay.
And in part, that's because NEH actually sets up their grants on a 5-year cycle. So the appropriation happens individually each year, but our grants are spread out over 5 years.
Thank you.
So the state appropriation, again, we're asking the committee to consider an increase to 300,000, which would support increased grant making.
Question about that. Can you help me understand the crosswalk from this budget and the governor's recommended 246? I think you probably explained this, but.
Yeah, and I don't think I know that term. I'm sorry, Rebecca. What does that mean?
In your budget,
Uh-huh.
the general appropriations listed as 241,885, but in our state web report recommendation, it says 246.
Yes.
And how we got to that?
So when my board passed the budget, it was before the governor's recommendations came out.
Okay.
They assumed a 3% increase. When the governor's recommendation came out, it was a 5% increase.
Thank you. I think you said that. Thank you.
Like the Arts Council, we are a private nonprofit, not a state agency. Further down is the expense side. I'm happy to answer questions about any of that if people have. Yes, sir.
Do you have anything, and I guess we could find it if we looked at last year's, but how your expenses and grants compared to last year outside of that one-time ARPA appropriation?
Sure. We went up from calendar year 21 to 22. If you take out all of the pandemic-related funding, I think about $150,000. And it's a similar increase from 22 to 23. And just so you know, all of our 990s are available to you as well as our audits.
Okay, so help me out. I'm looking at this. That might be an 8% increase in your expenses if I'm looking at the total.
Yeah, and revenue. And revenue.
Yeah, no, I understand. I mean, assuming you're in balance. So 8% the last 2 years, each year?
Yeah. And that's largely driven by increases in the grants budget, which is, we've just jacked it up year over year throughout the pandemic. When I started in 2018, it was $50,000 a year grants budget. This year, we expect it to be somewhere around 300,000.
Sorry.
No, I guess I'd be interested to know what percent your grants went up, which is, you're just a pass-through, what percent your expenses went up.
Yeah, I'd have to get back to you and let you know. But, you know, expenses have you're talking about programming expenses and staff expenses?
Sure.
Yeah, I can get back to you with that. Sure, I'll send it to Rebecca.
Yeah. Thank you.
I should say that we've grown the staff because we're doing more programming, right? So staffing costs have gone up. And this year in particular, and we talked to the governor about it, the health insurance costs went up about 50 grand. So that is important to consider.
big piece of it.
It's a big piece of it year over year. All right, thank you.
Good. Representative Mahali.
So I'm just trying to understand this line, general and administration, then it doesn't include payroll and benefits and professional development. Mileage includes health and what?
So if you're looking up above to the payroll expenses, that includes all the healthcare costs and staffing costs.
So what's in general?
Down under general and admin is, hold on, I have the detail. It is all of the dues and subscriptions we pay for we are part of a national organization of councils. It includes all of our subscriptions for various software programs that we have to buy. It includes our audit expenses and other accounting expenses, legal expenses, computer equipment, office supplies, that kind of thing.
Staples.
Staples, things you have to run an organization.
Right.
Audits are really expensive, as it turns out.
Yeah.
If you can find an auditor.
If you can find one, yeah.
We've been lucky to be with McSully McCoy and Company for a while, and they do great work.
I appreciate the focus on accessibility services. I know it's a real issue for a lot of communities. Thank you.
Yeah, and just how that plays out in real life. For example, this is a locally published book. There is no commercially available audiobook. So we are making from scratch 4 stories from this audio described. And that's $10,000 right there to do that and provide that alternative way of accessing materials. And now might be a.
Did you have more to say? Okay.
I'm good.
You're good?
Take a book, pass them down.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Tiff. Thank you. Excuse me, Representative Blumley.
Representative Blumley, yes. When we're when we're in official business, we refer to each other as representative. It's the formal. Representative Dickinson.
Yeah, I'm looking at your expenses. You have exactly $315,500 for grants and awards. I suspect there's a lot of other expenses that get wrapped into that.
That is actually the raw dollar amount that goes out the door in grants.
Into who receive them as
Into people who
organizations.
receive them, right? So staffing costs to run the grant program would be up above in personnel.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And so honoraria and, staff scholar reimbursement expenses, participant status, those are other things that go with that, or are they separate? What are they?
They are all of the above. Thank you for asking the question. So honoraria is money that we pay to community scholars who are doing our programming. So as with the artists, right, we don't ask anybody to do anything for free. So if somebody if Juliet, for example, is coming and doing a talk on Vermont Reads, we make a contribution to the Open Door Clinic that comes out of honoraria. Another thing that we do is a lot of professional development for early educators. Those early educators, when they take our trainings, are supported with an honoraria because they don't get paid by their jobs, right, by Turtle Island or their home daycare center to do professional development. They come, they take the training, they get credit for it from CCV, from Northern Lights, and we give them a check for their time.
So does that go to, for instance, their childcare center, or does it go to CCV, or where does that go?
Most of the women, and they are primarily women who take the trainings, are home daycare providers, and so the money is really for them. And if you're working at a center like Turtle Island, the expectation is that the money is for the employee as well, right? That it doesn't get folded into, and it's not seen by the person who makes $12 an hour. But it's actually to compensate them for their time, which is time outside of work.
It doesn't go to the anything. So it's an incentive really for the employees to be able to do this.
Right.
Not for the childcare center to send people out.
Right. Yeah, I mean, they've already worked 10-hour days, taking care of little guys. And then at 7:00 at night, they're coming and they're taking a 2.5-hour training from us. We didn't used to pay them, right? That's new over the last 2 years. Now we do, because, you know, I get paid when I go to a conference or to a training. Why shouldn't a childcare worker?
Okay, thank you.
Do those courses also count for their licensure and certification? I mean, that's a huge benefit because they don't earn enough to be able to pay for that. So it's a huge benefit.
It absolutely does. It counts towards their stars.
That's huge.
We also pay stipends honoraria to all of the humanities camp organizers, who are mostly teachers. That's a week of their time that they're volunteering out of their summer break. So we pay them to do that work. That also comes out of it. Not out of grants, out of honoraria.
We good?
Thank you so much for giving us so much time. It was really nice to not rush.
It's a rarity.
Thank Erin.
She's in control.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you, all of you, and thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Thank you for the book.
You're welcome. Please do check it out.
Put your name in it that it was presented by you, graduate of 1987.
Yeah.
I'll take that.
That's the one salient detail you want us to remember. Right?
Is that you graduated from Virgins in 1987?
That's really important, man. Virgins it's not the same as it was then.
No.
Well, much more Wild West back in the day. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So committee, who's coming, next is coming in?
I think it's the Human Rights Commission, is that right?
Vermont Historical.
I graduated 2 years after.
No, Human Rights Commission.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Society.
I was just remembering my entering
All right.
class was 160.
I've got a meeting to go to at 2:40.